Hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest webinar from IHS Markit. My name is Alan Tatara, Event Manager for the IHS Markit Technology Group webinar team, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. Today's webinar is Journey to MultiCloud using Remote Management. Managing agile development with distributed execution stacks is the next big IT challenge for business success. So our panel will explore best practices for leveraging remote management of clouds as part of an enterprise's multi-cloud strategy. Our webinar is co-presented by IHS Markit and our partner, ZeroStack. Before we get started, I want to highlight a few features that are available for you on our webinar and also how you can participate and make the most of your experience with us today. So the console that you're looking at is completely customizable. So you can open, close, move, or resize any of the windows that you have open on your screen and arrange the console to suit your preference. Now, at the bottom of your audience console are a number of application widgets which contain additional features available for you. So make sure you check these out during the webinar. I do want to mention the resource list widget, and this is where you're going to find additional material about today's topic, including the downloadable slide deck from today's session, as well as other valuable information. And all these materials can be accessed and downloaded right from your console, so please make sure you take advantage of those during the webinar. And we do want to make this an interactive session, so we've included a Twitter widget. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. This means you'll be able to tweet directly from the console. And today we are using the hashtag CloudAI. Now, we will also have a live Q&A session directly after the presentation, so please submit your questions or comments at any time by using that Q&A box that's on the left side of your screen, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible. And if you encounter any technical issues during the webinar, just click on that question mark widget, and you will get the answers that you seek. So now let me introduce our panel. First leading our discussion is Dr. Cliff Grossner. Cliff is Senior Research Director and Advisor in the Cloud and Data Center Research Practice segment at IHS Markit. And rounding out our panel, we have Steve Garrison. Steve is the Vice President of Marketing at ZeroStack. So welcome to both Cliff and Steve. It's great to have you with us today. So now let's get started with our presentation. So Cliff, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Alan, and I'd like to welcome the audience today, and looking forward to our discussion. We are going to start off by looking a little bit about what is that journey for enterprises to move to the multi-cloud, potentially starting with hybrid clouds from on-premise data centers. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why do we need to evolve the application stack, moving from the monolithic applications to something better. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why changing the stack could be difficult. What are some of the barriers that need to be overcome? And then we're going to focus a little bit about on how enterprises get started. A lot of the discussions I've had in the last little while is people or enterprises realize they need to get started on the journey, but they don't quite know how to do that. Then we'll share some success stories with remote managed clouds, and we'll have our sponsor ZeroStack talk a little bit about their approach to remote managed clouds. And we'll wrap it up with a quick summary of where we think the industry is going, what's next, and we'll open it up to the audience for Q&A. So what I'd like to share with everyone is our view on where we might be in the market roadmap for cloud services, where in 2014 to 2015, I think we can all think about the fact that we were working on agile computing. We were looking at how do we make enterprise data centers more agile, how do we take advantage of cloud service provider data centers and maybe even link the two together in terms of hybrid cloud model. We, in 2016 and 2017, actually went in a slightly different direction in the industry as enterprises started adopting clouds and realized that they needed to use many different cloud service providers for various reasons. In some cases, they had data already in certain cloud service provider data centers because they were using some of their SaaS applications and then wanted to compute in that data center where they're close to their data. In some cases, they were specialized application components such as AI and machine learning techniques that were made available by certain cloud service providers. And so the MetaCloud was born, where enterprises in an ad hoc fashion just connected to multiple different cloud service providers, including potentially having their own services or their own data center on premise. Now, what we've seen in the recent time frame is that enterprises have realized that it's one thing to ad hoc use different cloud service provider data centers, but at the end of the day, it needs to be managed. It needs to be managed both at the connectivity perspective, but also at the application level in terms of what applications are where, when do I put them there, how do I optimize a cloud or the different cloud data centers I'm using, and how do I manage that all in an orchestrated environment. Going forward, I also believe that this is going to only move to an environment where we have diversified cloud service provider data centers, and the multi-cloud will grow yet again, where we have data centers that are large compute farms with large storage farms that are centralized, and then we'll see smaller data centers around the edge nearer to end users where compute will take place. And again, enterprises will have choices about where they're going to place their compute and how they're going to manage the whole package. And one of the things that I wanted to share with everyone is how fast do we think this transition could be going, and what's the standard architectures that enterprises are currently in the phases of adoption. And so we asked enterprises in North America in the middle of June what was their cloud architecture of choice, or which ones were they using now and which ones did they see themselves using going forward, and that would be 2 years from when we did the survey in 2018. And what's interesting to see is that the large growth area is definitely in hybrid cloud, and the two types of hybrid clouds we track are the standard hybrid cloud, where everyone thinks about a certain amount of compute on-premise and a certain amount in off-premise in a cloud service provider data center, where the on-premise part is private and the cloud service provider part is shared infrastructure. We also have off-premise hybrid cloud, as you can see down at the bottom of the chart, where we have both the private and the shared part offered by the cloud service provider. So both those architectures in terms of hybrid cloud are seeing keen interest. And so that tells us that this type of multiple compute, but with coordinated data centers or coordinated sites, is taking hold and moving forward. Another indicator to us of how fast is the market going to go is the forecast we have of off-premise cloud services out to 2021. And so for 2016, we estimated there's approximately $125 billion of revenue to the cloud service providers. So this includes the very famous large-scale data center players like Microsoft, Azure, and Amazon, but also includes many of the telcos that offer cloud services, such as NTT in Japan, which is very active, Deutsche Telekom, China Unicom, China Telecom, et cetera, et cetera. And we also forecast very, very strong growth in this market. In fact, we see this market hitting just under $350 billion by 2021, where the blue is SaaS. So we can potentially take that away from this discussion, but when we look at cloud as a service and platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, we see that's still a very high growth market with a lot of adoption to come. So that tells us this is a very ripe environment. Now, the reason we believe the shift is some of the drivers are so strong is because enterprises have told us they want to get access to some of the technologies that they don't have the skill sets to develop in-house, such as enhanced tools and hardware tailored for artificial intelligence and machine learning, which, as we know now, many of the cloud service providers have made instances available, compute instances available that not only include general purpose compute, but also specialized compute. Now, one other indicator that gives us a good indication of where we are and how the market could potentially evolve is a question we asked around where are virtual machine deployment and container deployments going in the enterprise. And so we asked North American enterprise, again, what % of your virtual machines are in off-premise data centers in the middle of 2016 and by 2018. And so we see that goes from 12 to 17%. And we also asked the same question for containers, And we saw that going from 9% in the middle of 2016, 12% by 2018. So two takeaways here is there is a shift, but also we should not assume that the majority of compute is in off-prem. In fact, the majority of compute is still on-prem, even when we're dealing with containers. So that's our view on hybrid clouds evolving to multi-clouds. And what I'd like to share with you now is why does the application stack need to evolve in order to meet this goal or requirement. And the first thing I'll call your attention to is results, again, from some of our surveys where the top driver for adopting cloud is to improve performance. And it's pretty clear from the way legacy applications have been architected, that's not going to occur unless we can move to a new application architecture that can allow for that kind of performance improvement that enterprises are looking for. Right after that, we see that we are looking for a speed up to deployment of applications, and that speaks to the need for a total rethink of how we look at our application stack. Perhaps how often we do our nightly builds, what are the components in the stack, how can they scale, and so all of these elements need to be called into question when we see these kinds of requirements. And then, of course, right after that, we have the need to reduce cost. And again, that speaks to the need to be able to move to a scenario where we may have some on-premise equipment, but that we don't provision on-premise equipment to meet all workload requirements. I'd also like to provide some other evidence around some of the drivers and how we are starting to see the stack getting revised, but there's a lot of complexity in doing that. For example, when we look at questions we ask service providers about adoption of new technologies, we see that they talked about having, or they indicated that in 2016, near 4% of their servers were containerized, and they expect that to grow to 8% by 2018, which means a large rethink in the culture of how applications are built, how the application stack is constructed, and the expectations around how long does it take to deploy a virtual machine or deploy a container are going to rapidly change over time. And so with that, I'd actually like to pass the conversation over to Steve, my colleague on this webinar, to talk a little bit about some of ZeroStack's observations about what are some of the challenges in rethinking the application stack.
Thanks a lot, Cliff, and it's great to be here as well, and thanks to the audience for registering and coming. And I think just to summarize a couple of the key touch points you just mentioned, it's performance and the speed of delivery of those applications and services are really the two pain points that we hear a lot as to why are we even talking to companies about helping them solve that solution, that pain point, right? And this slide shows a bunch of blocks, but I want to give you a sense of why, or do we have 6 blocks on the slide. It keys on the title. There's really 3 personas or job specs or teams, depending on the size of the company, that fulfill this platform and the ability for developers to actually do their job. We've got the builders, the IT team, the operators, and then the users. And I'm going to use this 3 buckets or 3 roles-based method and discussion throughout the webinar so that you see how we go down in detail each time. But I want you to think about the fact that we have these 3 types of people that now have to work together. And that's one of the changes in cloud. There's more people involved in the decision, and their needs and goals have been different in the past. And again, cloud is a way to align those folks. So let's just take a high level first. IT, their whole life and blood and thinking is about controlling and securing the fundamental infrastructure that we're all used to, storage, network, and compute. The operations team is leveraging that infrastructure for orchestration, as you pointed out, Cliff, monitoring and looking at analytics, making sure the platform is operating as needed. So the idea of visibility and thinking about lifecycle management is really where their heads are. And, of course, the users just want to consume. And I think you point out accurately that SaaS is on the rise because a lot of users just say, can't I just go through a portal, use my favorite browser of choice, and get my job done? That's a new way of thinking. And a lot of IT teams are looking at how to bring that functionality on board because they see the value too. And another trend we see that's very important for new infrastructure is the idea of open APIs. A lot of the cloud native thinking, a lot of the container thinking is fully API-driven infrastructure, and so people are expecting that. And I think it's time to take a polling question here, Cliff, so we can actually understand where our audience is today. We can speak more directly to them. Well, let's go to that polling question.
Thank you, Steve. And so I'd like to, I would like to ask the audience to help us understand a bit where they might be in their movement to a different type of application stack. And one of the metrics that we use is what percentage of your applications that you're developing are using a microservices architecture. So I'd like to give the audience just a moment to respond, and I'd like to see, what percent of your applications have been developed using a microservices architecture. If you could help us by sharing that, then we'll be able to understand where at least the audience is in looking at and changing their application stack. And my bet is it's going to be pretty low still given the research I was just sharing with you on the rollout of containers, which to me is one of the bellwethers of moving to microservices architecture. And so we could see we have 44% of the audience is less than 5%, which isn't a surprise, but I'm actually surprised to see that as much as 10% of the audience is between 76 and 100%, and we've got some pretty sophisticated bars in the middle. Steve, I'm not sure if this is the kind of result you were thinking we would be seeing.
I'll tell you, Cliff, it is a bit surprising, but it's encouraging, right? And I think it's back to your initial point that people are still in three buckets. They're early adopters, and they've dived right into the challenge, or there's people who are still wondering how to get started. So let's just make sure we help both folks on the call here today. But I'm encouraged by the distribution. That's exciting.
Yeah, and in fact, when I look at the 10 or 11% that are between 76 and 100% microservice of their applications using a microservice architecture, it tells me that we're getting to, for me potentially, even though this is a small sample, people compared to the universe of people or organizations, that we could be approaching a point where we get that critical mass, or what I call crossing the chasm, to use an overused analogy, where we're starting to move the technology out of the hands of real early adopters, but still the market needs help to make that next leap, even though the next set of adopters is a bit more keen on taking on the technology now that someone has blazed the trail for them. So why don't we take a stab here at looking at what makes changing the stack somewhat difficult as well. And one of the things we asked some of our enterprise clients is, what kind of changes do you need to make to adopt cloud services, be it in your data center or move to the cloud? And the top one is, believe it or not, is adopt the cloud architecture in their on-premise data center. So what they're saying is that in terms of making the step, they have a lot of work to do in their own home, so to speak. And when I say adopt the cloud architecture, what that means is moving from simply having virtualized servers to having orchestration software deployed. So we move to that first level of true automation in the data center. And the next barrier that people tell us about, or element that they have to focus on before they believe they can be successful with cloud, is increase their focus on application performance. And I think the key takeaway there is that many enterprises are signaling to us that they just don't have the right metrics, the right tools in place, the right visibility as to what's going on with their applications. And before they can take the leap of faith to make another jump, they need to get that in place so that they can have the confidence to make the next step. And the other element of complexity is, whereas when you're dealing with an on-premise data center, you're kind of computing in one environment. And when you move to cloud services architecture and you start modifying your stack and you've distributed your compute in different data centers. Look at the complexity now of the architectures you're dealing with, from the public cloud, which is a shared infrastructure, to the off-premise private cloud, to the on-premise private cloud, to two forms of hybrid cloud, from off-premise hybrid, where you have both the shared and non-shared part in a cloud service provider data center, and just a traditional hybrid cloud, if I could call it that, where you have compute, the shared part in the cloud service provider data center, and the private or the non-shared part on-premise. So complexity starts to abound and go up. And I think that's some of the elements here that we see from a technology perspective. And I think Steve wants to talk to us a little bit about the challenge from perhaps even maybe a team structure perspective. So Steve, back over to you.
Thanks, Cliff. And again, great data to help us keep this discussion on track for the audience. So I'm building out the slide here in front of you that brings up this idea of teams again and just getting started. And it can be a daunting task. And again, Cliff, one of the things that we always see in our industry, just thinking abstractly, is that when there's a new trend, everybody assumes the market will go in one direction. And I think your last slide shows that what the data from your surveys and our discussions is that one size doesn't fit all. People do need to experiment. Multi-cloud is probably the end result for most companies, because nothing in IT is one way or the other. There's always a compromise. So when you look at the needs to build that stack, you need to pick your hardware. That could be from your current incumbent provider. You might realize that it's time to look at hyperconverged metal as an example of a change event. You might find that your existing virtualization vendor may not have the best or well-suited cloud offering. You might be looking at an open source decision here and going for a do-it-yourself model. You might be looking at your tool sets and realizing, are they really suited for cloud native in container environments, or are they really focused on Java.NET environments? And that would require you to think about investing at this point potentially. Also, the team. Do you have the on-staff resources you need? Are you going to look at a professional services provider or system integration team to help you? What we find the most important thing is that we've learned from hundreds of discussions and many successful deployments of cloud is that to take a step back and form a team. Bring IT together, bring the operations team together, bring leadership from the development team, bring BU leaders together, and ask those questions. Where are we? Where are our skill gaps? What budget do we have? Where do we want to be in 3 to 5 years? And formulate an architecture and a use case that fits the company's needs and where you are. What's a rational way to start? Crawl before you run kind of thing. When we get into the next slide here, which is, so what actually happens if some of those things aren't done right? We've got a couple of characters here. We've got the developers on the left. We've got IT on the right. And they both have operational pain. There's always two sides to any argument or any observation. And a common complaint or observation or pain that we hear from the IT team is, shoot, Steve, we're adding developers, and I'm getting so many tickets a week now, I can't keep up. I can't provision and stand up resources fast enough for them. I feel like my time to value to the company is diminishing. On the other side, the developers typically, again, look outside and go, why can't we have a SaaS-operated model? That's the way the public cloud guys do it. Why should I be waiting for virtual machines? Aren't there predefined templates that help me get up and go quickly? There's actually a click war going on in the industry right now. Who can do the least amount of clicks to get somebody up and running? And that's fun to watch from the marketing point of view, but it is confusing for customers because until they see it, it's really hard to validate are the number of clicks really small or not. But regardless, the idea of click and go technology versus sit and wait is really where people want to go with cloud, that idea of agility, that idea that the complexity has been hidden by them somehow or by the team somehow so they can just do their job. So again, the main takeaway here is if you form the team right and have all those voices involved from the get-go, you'll have a much better process, you'll make a much more informed decision, and you won't see this operational pain once you're up and running. Let's change gears here and go to the next section break, which I believe I lead, so I want to now talk about the aspects more detailed of that cloud journey. And this next slide here leads into another polling question, so get ready. But what we like to do is realize the most important thing, and I think this webcast is another time for us to do that, Cliff, is just make sure everybody knows that when you ask somebody what's cloud mean to you, you're going to get a lot of different answers. We have customers who believe that running services on bare metal is a cloud. We have customers who believe just their virtualized environment, standing up VMs, is a private cloud. We have organizations that have embarked on the next step of abstraction, which is that, going to infrastructure as a service. Then the next step, we've already started to dabble in that, is the container or microservices mantras that you're hearing. And then the newest idea this year is, the serverless environment. Can I just provision everything from a portal and never touch infrastructure at all? Well, those are all great ideas, but again, it's well known that certain applications just run better in certain environments. I think if we did a poll, does Hadoop run better on bare metal? The world would recognize that's a true statement more times than not. That said, if you talk to an IT sysadmin running email, almost certainly they're going to have Exchange running on a virtual machine, so they're in the second bucket. People who are developing apps now just think about infrastructure as a service as a get-started model. So again, it just depends where you are in that journey. There's no wrong answer. It's about the business. It's about the apps. And this, again, take this right into a polling question, Cliff, which is, help us understand where the audience is today, and it'll, again, help us talk more directly to the audience on the webcast.
Well, thanks, Steve. So let's give the audience a second. But effectively, we'd like to know where you are, what stage of the journey you are in when it comes to adopting the cloud using the stages that Steve just talked about in the previous slide. So, are you really at the beginning where you've got your server still physical and you're working on virtualization? Have you virtualized your servers and are now thinking about moving to some infrastructure as a service model where things are orchestrated? Are you now at the point where you're looking at software containers, or even moving to a world where you don't think about things as physical servers anymore, but as objects that just get distributed? So let's see
Absolutely,
what the audience...
Cliff. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's see what they say. I can't wait to see, as you can tell. I'm excited.
Okay.
And I think it's, oh, wow. Yeah. Amazing data. Cliff, what do you think?
Well, actually, this is not a surprise. This is exactly what I would have expected, that, pretty much everyone's finished staring at virtualization and figured out what to do about that. And really, the next challenges are that IES piece and the software container piece, and serverless compute, I think, is kind of a dream in the distance at this point.
Yeah, but it's all about abstraction, Cliff, and I think that's part of the point you brought out about complexity, right? Abstraction gives us the agility we want. It helps people not think about what's underneath their layer. That's helped, build the mantras and ideas we have going forward in the industry. But at the end of the day, somebody's going to manage that complexity, and I think that's at the heart of why we're getting at this idea about remote management. And but I would agree, if I had been asked before the survey, what do we see at ZeroStack, we see most of the people starting from a virtualization beachhead and moving right on that curve. So.
Okay, good. Well, Steve, I think it's back over to you at this point to continue.
It is indeed. Yeah, and it's again, I want to play upon this this construct I had before of the three personas, or the three teams, but we flipped it on you here to make it a little bit more complex. But the green layer is the IT layer. Again, you're looking at storage, network, compute. Trends here, Cliff, you mentioned automation, very key. This is where the software-defined everything battleground is right now. But it's all aimed at how can I reduce provisioning time and automate basic maintenance and configuration, because those are tasks that everybody knows takes time. It's where fat finger events are. So ways to simplify that really help an IT organization respond faster, again, and make that time to value metric much more favorable. The next layer up, the blue layer, this is where we've got the operators. Again, you see a high focus here on the cells, the data there, the capabilities in terms of monitoring and analytics, because if you're doing orchestration, if you're moving things around, you really have to have more real-time readout. And this is one of the complexities that comes in. So there's a lot of new companies coming in, showing their wares around the idea of more visibility. And there's also the incumbent vendors are adding that functionality as well. This is, again, as you pointed out very early on in the call, Cliff, this is where the machine learning is coming in, because the idea of behavior mapping and tracking behavior, no different than we saw many years ago with credit card companies. Hey, are you in London buying a stereo gear right now, Steve? Nope, I'm sitting here in Mountain View talking to you all on the webcast, so that's clearly a problem. And the same thing is starting to happen with virtual machines and containers and looking at their behavior based on the trending and helping IT and operations professionals do what we call proactive remediation, right, making decisions before things happen. And then the last layer there in the upper right, the orange layer, that's the users again, and we're specifically talking about developers here today. But long story short, they're all about consuming in the fastest way they can. So the idea of templates, app store or app repositories of the known stacks, APIs to bring in the tool sets and tool chains that they like to work with, that's where they're all coming from. So you do hear different voices. And again, this goes back to why I feel that the most consultative thing we can share on the call today in this world of complexity, form a team, bring all the decision makers in early on. It really helps. Now let's change gears. This sounds really complex. I think everybody's on the edge of their chair waiting. What's the big answer here, Steve and Cliff? Well, it's in the title of the webcast and it's in the abstract. It's this idea of remote management. It's a way to bring in automation, but it's also a way to bring in a new architecture that actually isn't new, as it turns out. There's another silo or segment of IT that 10 years ago came in and said, we have a similar problem. We have hundreds or thousands of devices that need to be discovered, configured, and managed on-prem, but how do we do it simply? Well, that idea was brought forth by building a cloud brain that's in a SaaS portal that does exactly that, discovers, configures, and manages those on-prem assets. Well, we're seeing the same rise of that idea in the cloud market for the same reasons. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of skills that need to be brought on board. And there's a lot of challenges in rolling those up and finding means to get there in a reasonable budget. So if there's a new way to do it, let's take a look. The best of both worlds mantra that we hear is, geez, can't I just consume, and is there a simpler way or a way to avoid managing things? I really want to have a hands-off like public cloud, but shoot, Cliff, we know we want high performance. We might have a different security issue. So we do want to understand that key assets and applications that need to be on-prem can be on-prem. So there's this hybrid architecture in front of you. The users are consuming through a laptop or a PC screen, your browser of your choice. They're dialing into the SaaS portal, no different than public cloud. And software is communicating and command and controlling those assets back on-prem, and your assets are right next to you on-prem. So that's a win-win. And I think that's the new shift in how software can take the next step in minimizing the operational complexity. Organizations that may not have been able to find the talent or pay for the talent to build these clouds can now embark on the cloud journey and still have that best of both worlds mindset. We're going to dive right into the next use case that Cliff highlighted earlier, the next section on use cases, and we brought forth two today. And I had the pleasure of talking to both of these customers last week and getting their permission to use their information on the call. The first company in the Midwest, you usually don't think of the Midwest as being a first mover, but in this case, they're a very well-run company. The founders are very visionary people, and they really do want to bring mobile cloud-native type thinking into their supply chain management model in 3 to 5 years. So today they're fully virtualized, but they recognized they needed to start. And in this case, they wanted to build a separate environment. There's rules or debates about whether you should do that or not, but in this case, they said, we want to build a new environment so we can break away from our old best practices and really rethink the new best practices for cloud. In this case, we were able to show that small development team radically different metrics through the idea of cloud management. So we have this thesis that software makes things easier. Okay, we'll look at the bottom right bullet first. The number of hours used by the team to run their virtualization infrastructure is approximately 40 hours. With the remote managed solution, it's only 4 hours, 10x reduction in operational cost. That's pretty dramatic, especially for an organization that's trying to shift over time and not have a step function in new costs right away. The other metric that's interesting is this idea of self-service. So with the remote management, you get that public cloud-like experience. Again, waiting for central IT was a 3-hour experience. With the SaaS portal environment, it's about a minute. Huge increase. Again, think of that time metric that Cliff highlighted in your data earlier and the audience has heard about. And then when you wrap all this together with TCO and looking at the cost per VM, you get a radically different TCO metric. So that's an interesting company with a vision. Again, thanks a lot to Adam and the team. Shout out to them. We have another customer in the Midwest here now that's actually building security software. Their software is served up on a public cloud, but they do a lot of dev on-prem. And the rationale for that is, at the high level, is they have a lot of IOPS-heavy development work. And if you put that into public cloud without constraints, you will get the bad news bill. And so they realize that going into production with the right apps in the public cloud makes sense, and that's how they serve up their SaaS offering. But when you pull it back and do dev and control costs, they found that having a multi-cloud strategy to hybridize where things go as a function of where they are in their life cycle and what kind of app they are really helped them save money. So we saw a nice TCO metric here. They also have a multi-site development environment, and so having a single pane of glass central control for the developers to see what's going on, as well as interwork with different sites, really helps that team collaborate better. And any of them can integrate with the public cloud, Amazon in this case, move workloads back and forth as needed. And so that really gave them the cloud experience and the choice that a multi-cloud sales pitch would hopefully deliver. Moving on to our next section, here the idea of what does actually ZeroStack do? That you can probably guess that we have something to do with remote management. By gosh, you're right on. We've taken that architecture to the next step. We've brought in machine learning to both the SaaS portal as well as the on-prem solution. Let me talk about that briefly. We call the portal, in our case, the ZBrain, and we call the on-prem solution ZCOS because that's the cloud operating system. We basically give customers a USB stick. They plug it in the server, single click. They're up and running in under 30 minutes. That's a marketing claim, folks, but we dare you to challenge us. We beat everybody in the industry on this, and we're proud of it because we include the operating system, SDS, SDN, orchestration, platform services all in one bundle. So it really is a simple install. On-prem, we also have machine learning to help with self-healing. We have a 4-cluster minimal node model, which means that the applications and services and data are spread out over 4 disks. So any hardware failure is protected and invisible to you. And then the sales portal above has telemetry and modeling data that helps to make proactive decisions, capacity planning, helping you even decide what types of servers to expand to, looking at VM sizing. By the way, both capacity planning and VM sizing provisioning are the 2 main reasons that customers find they have a bad bill experience with public cloud because they tend to over-provision based on best practices. Our machine learning comes back and says, Cliff, we can save you some time and money on the product. We can resize those VMs for you. We can help you understand where storage is being utilized and help you better utilize the infrastructure you paid for. And that's really showed value to customers. All right, so moving on, I don't want to spend too much time on that. I want to talk about the next section here. Cliff, I think it's back to you to help the listeners understand what's next in the industry.
Well, thank you, Steve. And also, as we transition into the next section, I want to remind everyone that we are going to open up the floor to questions shortly. And now's a good time, if you have any, and some people have already entered some questions, to please go ahead and enter your questions, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can. Well, I think for me, looking at where the industry is going, it's all about development. It's all about the developers. It's all about providing platforms for developers to diversify compute, to pick up where application components where they need them with specialized technologies without necessarily having to have certain skill sets in-house. For example, it's pretty hard to find a data scientist these days. There happen to be a very scarce resource. I think no one's surprised by that. So anytime that application developers can go to a cloud service provider platform and be able to develop applications without the benefit of having to have in-house skilled labor, that's very good. And when we asked in another one of our surveys, again, enterprises in North America, what percent of your applications are developed using an off-premise PaaS platform? In 2016, that was at about 11% of applications, and they expected that to grow to 19%, so just under doubling by 2018. So definitely seeing that, understanding that as we move to a different application stack, diversity of where we compute is going to increase. Steve, I think you may have a few last words you want to share with us.
I do, Cliff, and I'll try to keep it short so we can get to those questions, but I do have quite a few things to say on this slide. First, we have this claim on our website, the cloud that drives itself. We're trying to have some fun in our marketing messaging and make a parallel to the whole idea of self-driving technology. And in this case, everybody's probably aware of self-driving cars. And over the last 5 years, I've seen just an amazing amount of technology making it easier to park and change lanes, which in our household, we lease cars, so we've returned those cars with far less dings. Cliff, let me tell you, it's really helped out the garrisons reduce our ROI on car leasing challenges. But on the cloud side, to bring it back to home, the ZeroStack, I've already talked about the machine learning thesis. So we're going to keep on that track. You're going to see us make more announcements over the coming months and years about more value, cloud choice, helping you understand where the workload should go. We're not greedy. We want to help you make informed decisions because we believe it's a multi-cloud universe long term. It's not going to be one way or the other way. It's going to be the right way for that app. You're going to see us make some announcements around anomaly detection, something I hinted at earlier. We can help you see, based on the experience of your platform and using those smart data scientists that we have to build that smart software, we can help predict those things. But what I also want you to understand is we're not in this alone, and I know Cliff and I have a long-standing relationship over partnering. If you go to our one thing you want to do, and if the only thing you do, I beg you to go to our partner tab and see about 100 logos there, because we believe, contrary to Galileo, the universe is actually centered by the cloud. So everything around us, below storage network compute, we announced partnerships with Nexena and Nimble Storage earlier this year. That's really helped those customers and the partners that resell those products understand how we can cloudify that infrastructure and bring immediate value to assets they already have. We partnered with Dell and HP on the server side last year. Why? Because a lot of customers have a branded favorite they like to work with. We also work with the white box guys like Supermicro. You'll see us add more partnerships there. On the application side, we have an app store where we have those pre-built templates I was alluding to. There's over 50 applications in there right now, from the operating systems like CentOS to Red Hat to Puppet, Chef, Ubuntu, lots of choices, Jenkins, Cassandra at the application development layer, Kubernetes, Docker, all these things are in there to make it easy to point, click, and go. So again, we have a website. Everybody knows it. We have a Twitter feed we're really proud of. Cliff, let's get into some questions because I think I know people are smart enough to come to our website if they want to learn more, and I know they've got some assets embedded in this webcast that they can download. So,
okay, thank you, Steve. And actually, we do have a question that I think needs to be addressed. It's around security and how do we provide security for this entire environment. I know from our research that one of the top concerns that enterprises have in moving to the cloud is making sure, they are secure in doing so, that their data is secure, that they maintain control over their data. And I was wondering, in your experiences and the customers you've turned up, what kind of security discussions have you had, and how do you overcome that?
Yeah, Cliff, that's a great question. I tell you, anything new in IT operations or from the development standpoint, you got to go through the 1, 2, 3 on security because anything new can bring in a new door, right? So the long answer is pretty long. We have a 22-page white paper just on our security architecture and best practices. The short answer is we start with access control. We start with multiple layers of authentication and access. So there's always that master user or admin, and then there's different levels of abstraction to contain and compartmentalize users. With business units, we have projects, we have VMs at 3 levels of abstraction, and they're all locked down, and you have to have access based on the administrator's rule sets. We have a Port 443 security model, just like Salesforce, just like any sales or SaaS platform today. The industry as a whole understands the security quality around that. It's quite good. We also have additional things around SSHing in and getting access to different aspects of the product. So the short answer is it's a normal part of the sales process. We respect it, we expect it, and we take a lot of time to go through the security architecture of our product. But like I said, Cliff, the long answer is it's a 22-page white paper, but believe me, customers read it and they ask questions after reading it, and that's something we can easily offer people. Yeah.
Right, I'm sure. I was about to say, I'm sure if our listeners would like to have a copy of that white paper, they have a way to get it from you.
You bet.
Another question that I think would be important is, when you're working with a customer, they have to make some sort of decisions about on-premise versus off-premise. And so, how does an organization go about making such a decision? What are some of the criteria that they look at and the process they go through?
Yeah, and we've actually covered all the angles on the call, but let me try and summarize them because we did kind of roll it out in breadcrumbs, but the breadcrumbs lead to the answer. So one, it's about your organization as a whole. What are your policies and procedures? We know in Europe, the data governance rights are much different than the U.S. and in Asia as well. So there might be a regulatory concern at the high level. We know that certain apps perform better on-prem because of performance. And so, again, people with IOPS-heavy technology or people who are doing machine learning as they build as part of their software, they tend to want to be on-prem because of cost or latency concerns. The other thing is it could be just a load balancing thing, like I pointed out before, that people might start in one environment, realize that as they scale it, it's not really the right place to keep it in production. So there's no one answer, Cliff. It's back to performance and security, obviously bring you back to prem. But we trust in the public cloud model. We integrate with public cloud. We're not afraid of the public cloud model. In fact, we want to help customers leverage it because the way people start typically is the public cloud is a cheap and easy way to get a DR or backup and recovery model going. It doesn't cost a lot of money to have certain assets mirrored and put in there. The cost structure is low as long as your number of terabytes is low. Scaling up SaaS onto a public cloud, if you're offering a SaaS offering, that can be a challenge, again, to scale that and keep costs down. So we're seeing some SaaS companies come to us and look at bringing their solution back to our on-prem solution, as what some people are now calling edge computing, if you've heard that new theme. So I think I've touched upon it, Cliff, but feel free to chime in.
Well, yeah, thanks, Steve, and I think that covers it pretty well. I think, I've seen very similar things in some of the events that I've been to in recent presentations by the Governor of the Bank of England. There's a lot of discussion about the legalities of the data center that's housing your data and whether that owner of that data center, the operator, is what legal entity is it? Where is that legal entity incorporated? Is that a legal entity incorporated in a foreign territory or foreign country, in which case they could be subject to laws outside of the country? And that was something that certainly the Bank of England didn't want. So there are many reasons why data is going to not only stay local, but stay in data centers owned by local providers, again, fueling potentially more multi-cloud sites. Another question that I think the audience is, that the audience has been asking us to take a look at is, when we look at the type of organizations you come across, you see some looking to do it themselves with open source, and you see some looking at prepackaged solutions. So what kind of organizations are you seeing targeting these different types of ways of building their cloud?
Yeah, that goes back to that very early slide where we showed the different component trees. And I think the simple answer there is the more team you have, the more you can embark on an open source journey. But there are exceptions. We're talking to a few mid-sized companies, say 400 or 500 employees, that their products are open source based, so they're very comfortable with that type of technology. But most mid-sized companies, if we want to generalize, are the ones who are looking for the prepackaged turnkey, come in and help me. And in fact, the Wi-Fi organizations that kicked off this whole remote managed idea 10 years ago found that the mid-market, whatever that means, not everybody knows what the mid-market means. I would say to size it, say a few hundred employees to a few thousand, say a couple $100 million to a few billion in revenue. That's what I mean by mid-market. They were the quick adopters of the remote managed technology. Guess what? We're seeing exactly the same adoption here. We're seeing, again, smaller organizations embarking on open source because that's their business case. And, of course, larger companies can afford to have more teams and more resources. And I think when you look at the people who are contributing to, say, Kubernetes or Docker, you'll see that those are mostly the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000.
Okay, and to be honest with you, I see if we look at the telco space, there again we see
telco space is another good example, Cliff. Yeah, yep.
Definitely looking more at the open source, and that matches our research. Because in our
and that's well said.
Surveys, when we survey service providers versus enterprise, there's quite a big difference in the service providers. We see a lot more willingness to look at open source, whereas the enterprises are still looking for that traditional prepackaged solution that makes it easy for them to.
And I think that makes it makes sense. I think telcos have very specific service delivery models and very specific infrastructure, and they want to tune it, and the open source really is a way to customize at that scale. So it totally makes sense.
Okay, well, Steve, we have pretty much just one more question that the audience is.
All right, let's do it.
And so that was asking us, can you talk a little bit about the different industry verticals that are using remote managed clouds?
Sure.
And is there one vertical you're seeing more attention to, or are there certain parameters that certain verticals seem to be more concerned about?
Yeah, I think look, since we kind of skewed this thing because of the title of the webcast, but it's also back to where we're finding the most interested clients to work with at this time. It's software is your business. Right, and so you don't have to be a software company that eventually sells software services or has a SaaS offering like our security use case example. It could be a manufacturing company like our first use case that has a very sophisticated dream and existing vision with workflow, supply chain management, inventory management, all the way through to their end disties, and looking at that inventory and helping to make sure it's efficient. So they just believe that software is an enabler. So the first question we ask is, do you have a lot of software development or software as a key part of your business? If we get a yes, we dive in and we know it's going to be a good call, Cliff. That could be across multiple industries, but if I wanted to simplify it, we know that high-tech companies tend to be leading in that metric right now, and my guess is if we were able to peel back the onion on the first survey question, we would have found that some of the folks that answered that they were already embarking on containers and serverless technology, those folks were probably in a very forward-looking software company or tech company. That's a guess, and we're not in Vegas, so I don't have to make a real bet.
Okay, Steve. I want to thank the audience, and that is all the questions we got. And at the same time, I'm going to turn it back over to Alan for a few concluding remarks.
Thank you, Cliff. I want to thank everyone as well for participating on our webinar today and for submitting all your questions and comments. We do appreciate that. A special thank you to Cliff for leading our discussion, as well as Steve Garrison from ZeroStack for this very informative webinar. So an archived version of this webinar will be made available shortly. We'll be sending you a follow-up email on how to access that archive, or you can simply use that same audience link that we sent you earlier. So feel free to come back and view this session again, or even share it with your colleagues. And just a reminder, you're going to see a short survey pop up at the conclusion of our webinar. We'd love to get your feedback, so please take a few minutes to fill that out. We would appreciate that as well. And make sure you follow us on Twitter for information on future IHS Markit Technology Group webinars. So again, thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.